Good evening. My name is Mark Dion. I'm City Councilor for District 5 and the Chair of the Finance Committee. I'm calling this committee to order for purposes of reviewing budget items. The first item for our consideration is the superintendent's proposed budget. At this juncture, I will turn over the meeting to my counterpart from the Board of Education, District Representative Adam Burke, to facilitate the participation of representatives from the Board of Education. Adam, the gavel's yours.
Thank you, Councillor Dion. Thanks for having us again this evening and for conversations we've had to date. This evening, we'll be hearing from the Superintendent and Director of Finance on some questions that came forward previously. Our proposed budget and approved budget has not changed in its total of $133 million, representing a 4.1% increase to taxes on the school side. And of course, we've seen the city budget come forward with a 5.5% tax increase on the city side, and appreciated the things that were driving the costs there. Some unique, of course, to running a city versus running a school district, but also shared challenges and context as well. And I saw, I think it was Councillor Chong who spoke to the press directly about some of those shared challenges, and I appreciated that. Seeing that the total combined tax rate increase of 4.8%, seems fair within the context of an inflation rate upwards of, 7 to 8% currently, knowing that we're trying not to balance budgets on the back of people who have kept our city and schools afloat and moving throughout the pandemic and our ongoing needs as the pandemic's not over, but it's changed, as well as just servicing the needs of our unique institutions as well. I think it's also fair in this context that there was a 0% tax increase for the past 2 years. And I think that was the good work of all of us together to be considerate of what everybody was going through. So I'm going to turn it over to the superintendent and he'll take us through a presentation. And, afterwards, if there's additional questions, we'll attend to those, of course, within what we're able to attend to this evening, and if there's things that we need to return to you on. But I think, we're trying to come to a culmination of our conversation this evening as you move to vote the budget out of committee, hopefully. So Superintendent Botana, over to you.
Thank you, Chair Burke. And I don't know if we want to do introductions. I know this is not our first meeting, so I think that everybody here knows everybody else. But if you want to do that maybe before we start, if not, I will just jump in.
I would welcome the introduction, Superintendent.
Right. So obviously, I'm Javier Botana. I'm Superintendent of the Portland Schools, and I will turn it over to our Executive Director for Budget and Finance.
I'm Kathy Winchenbach, Executive Director of Budget and Finance. Good evening.
And then I don't know if you want to, yeah, I was going to say, there we go.
Thank you.
I'm Emily Figdor. I'm Chair of the School Board and the District 2 representative, and also a member of the Finance Committee. And thank you so much for our time together tonight. I look forward to this conversation. Mr. Youssef, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Chair. My name is Youssef. I'm a school board member at large, and I'm also a member of Finance Committee. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jody Diu, and I'm the Portland Adult Education Student Rep for the school board.
My name's Aura Russell-Better. I'm District 4 school board member. I'm not on the committee, but I'm just here to support and witness. Thanks.
Thank you, Superintendent. I guess I'm going to interrupt for just one moment. Tiffany, if we want to make sure to move Councilor Rodriguez over the panelist side, would be helpful.
Happy to do that.
And while we're at it, we'll do a quick introduction of city representatives so that then you won't be interrupted, Superintendent, in your presentation. My apologies. I'll start with Mayor.
I'm Kate Snyder, Mayor, ex officio non-voting member of the Finance Committee, and I'll hand it over to Councilor Trevorrow.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm Anna Trevorrow, District 1 City Councilor and member of the Finance Committee. I will hand it over to Councilor Chung.
Hi, I'm Tate Chung. I'm City Councilor for District 3. I'm not on the committee, and I'll turn it over to Councilor Zaro.
Hey everybody, Andrew Zaro, City Councilor District 4. I am not on the committee, but I'm happy to be here and see all of your familiar faces. And I will pass it off to, who do we have left? Councilor Rodriguez.
Thank you, Councilor Zaro. As usual, I'm still outside and working, so I have my camera off. But I'm Councilor Roberto Rodriguez at large and not a member of the committee. Looking forward to listening in today. Thank you.
And Brendan, can you introduce your staff?
Brendan, you're on mute.
He's probably not with us yet. Ann, you want to introduce yourself?
Sorry, now I'm unmuted. Brendan O'Connell, the city's finance director. I have Ann Bilodeau, our deputy finance director, with us, and Tiffany Mullen, the finance department's executive assistant.
And I heard that the city manager is with us as well. Am I correct?
That is correct. I was going to say, was it the voice of God? Maybe. I don't know. Is that what you heard? It wasn't. I am Danielle West, interim city manager.
All right, then. Well, Superintendent, thank you for the reminder, but it's back to you now.
Awesome. Thank you. And I would also just like to thank everyone for the opportunity to come here now for the, I believe, third time to talk about our budget. I do want to point out that this is no longer the superintendent's recommended budget. This is the board's adopted budget. So, that was a mislabel on the agenda. So this is the budget that has been approved by the school board and referred to the city council. So we don't have a lot for today. Tiffany, am I able to share screen?
Yes, you should be able to do that.
Thank you. Do you all see this? Okay. So what we are doing today is just answering some questions that came from the last meeting, primarily around two areas. One is our federal funding, and we are prepared to talk about, what would the implications be for us to use federal funding. We'll talk a little bit about where we are with the use of our federal funding. And then the other thing is, I think Councilor Trevorrow had mentioned at the previous meeting, in the past, we do some comparisons to other communities around us. And so we're also prepared to do that. I think you have in the agenda packet, you have my presentation for today. So I'm going to go through it, but you also have a copy of it in your packet. So what I wanted to start with, and I am grateful to Kathy for her work on this, and she's actually prepared to sort of on the spot if, people wanted to know what what different alternatives would be. So in essence, what you have here is a projection of what our costs would be and what the implications would be on the tax rate if we were to not raise any taxes and instead wound up using whether it's federal funding or reserves. So, the $4.1 million increase in revenue that we are asking for, if we were to not do any of that, so there was no tax increase on the school side this year, and then you looked at what that would mean for the following year, if we use these three escalators. This is not in any way, shape, or form an assumption that this is what our expenses would be for next year. And this also, it's important to note, assumes that all other revenue is static. So we don't have an increase or a decrease from state funding. And so this is just assuming that we were to remain static on the revenue side. If we had a 7.5 escalation in our costs, and just to sort of put this in context, as you know, this year's increase is just over 5%, and last year's was, I think, 5.5%. So, probably the 5% is more realistically where our expenditures are year to year. But if we had a 7.5% escalation in costs, that would, and we didn't get any taxes revenue this year, next year, to be able to do that, we would have a 13.4% tax increase. If we had a 5%, it would be a 10% increase. And if our escalation was just 2.5%, it would be a 6.8% increase on the tax rate. And then, here you see what those increases would be if we actually did have our, we got our tax increase this year, and we still had those same escalations. So those numbers are are obviously lower, because we would not be needing to raise all of the revenue that we didn't raise this year, plus whatever we needed for next year. So that's, I know that there has been discussion about the possibility of us using our federal funds. And so that we wanted to just start by sort of bringing that to everyone's attention, so that we all understand what the implications are of doing that. And then you've seen a previous version of this. This slide actually has not changed at all. This is our SRF2. We have 3 different tranches, if you will, of federal relief funding. And so this is the second one. The first one started way at the start of the pandemic, has already been fully used. It was about $2 million. This $8 million grant is fully committed. There's a remaining balance of $2.2 million, much of which will be used, before the end of this year. And if not, there are commitments that have been made going into the following year. So this money is not, in essence, available for use. And then you had also seen a previous version of this that has been updated with our actuals as of 3/7, and so this basically is the third grant that we received of federal funding, roughly $18 million, of which you can see right now what has currently been allocated and what has currently been expended. But again, as I mentioned the last time that we reviewed this is still this is the school year is not out, and some of this, including, for example, $5 million in summer programming, is to be used this summer and next summer. So those are commitments that have already been made, but the expenditures obviously are zero on that. And so what is updated is this next slide, which shows you a more realistic, this is Kathy's work, which I'm very grateful for, to really look at where we are, what is currently allocated and expected to be spent either through the remainder of this year, this summer, and the following summer. And this gives you an idea of what we currently have estimated is unspent, which is roughly $12 million. So that's what is currently unexpended. I did mention at the last time that we had this conversation that the board is poised to begin a conversation in June about how to allocate those resources to support both things that are priorities that we've identified and not funded, as well as engage in a community process to participatory budgeting process. So that's where we are with our federal funds. So I can pause here or move into district comparisons, but if anybody has questions around the federal funds and, any of the information that I shared in those 5 slides or so, I'd be happy to take them now, or I am happy to wait and, come back to them later as well.
Superintendent, why don't you proceed and then we'll get to the questions when everything's done.
Yeah, this will be fairly quick. These you've seen, those who've been on the council before have seen some of these slides in their previous year versions. And so we're going to walk through these fairly quickly, but we're going to start with, and these are unofficial. This is a record that we've been keeping on what surrounding communities have requested at the superintendent level when they presented their budgets. And so you can see ours in, ours is in blue. And so this is organized by the percentage increase in the budget. So as you know, ours is a 5.1% increase. So you can see the range of Cumberland County districts that and what their proposed expenditure increase is. And then this is organized by the impact on the tax rate. So, here again, you can see where we are, our 4.1% increase and, the comparison to other surrounding districts in terms of the impact of their proposed increases. This you've heard in numerous conversations along the way, and I think in some of the testimony that you've heard along the way during public hearings, people talk about the decrease in our student population, which is factual. So we wanted to just contextualize that to our to, again, our comparisons around us and, some of the other districts that we usually use as a measuring stick. So the ones that are, sort of service centers, larger school districts like Biddeford, Lewiston, Bangor, and so on. So you can see here, again, we've had about, just under a 2% decrease in our student population in this period of time. And you can see what that looks like in some of those surrounding communities. So I think, again, there's been overall, I think statewide, about a 3% decrease in the student population over the last year, after, another similar decrease the previous year as a result of COVID. We are looking at the comparison of tax rates. So just the school portion of the tax rate is, this column and then the total, and the same for all of the other districts. So, Portland at this point has the lowest tax rate of any of the communities that we used as a comparison. So, and you can see what the average is for both the school and the total for the city and school combined. Kathy, if I am missing anything, just feel free to jump in because you know these slides better than I do. But this is the the comparison of how much of our budget we get from the state compared to some of those other communities. And you can see here, we get under 20%, it's 19%. It's been as low as 15. So I always want to give credit where credit is due, and both our legislative delegation and the Mills administration, as you know, it's the first time that the state has actually hit the 55% statutory requirement in terms of overall funding for education in the state. But because we are a high value school district, a school district with a very high valuation, we get a relatively, modest portion of our budget is funded by the state, and the expectation is that the remainder of that is picked up by the local community. And so you can see what that looks like in comparison to some of our surrounding districts, as well as some of the larger districts that are also service centers. And then this is, I think this is specifically a request that that Councillor Chung asked, or a question, a response to a question that Councillor Chung asked about the fact that, the state only tells us to spend X number of dollars and we spend significantly more than that. And I think my answer at the time was, everybody does. And so this gives you an idea of the range of how much more each community spends over what the state allocates. And so you can see that in our case, we're sort of at the middle of that, in this 20-some% range of districts. And then there's, a number of districts that spend, significantly more than we do, and a couple that spend, below 20% over that. And I do want to point out, if you go back to this previous slide, that those are districts that receive significantly more of their revenue from the state. So it does, change the equation in terms of, how difficult it is to raise that additional revenue from their local taxpayers. And obviously they have a smaller valuation, so I'm not diminishing the impact of it, but it just is important to look at this and that together. And then this may be a little bit sort of overly geeky, but it is, when we shared how the EPS funding formula works at the last meeting, we talked about, that there is an allocation of X number of staff that is, that's required. So that's what the state says based on, their calculations of what their formula is supposed to, what the formula is supposed to do, and the way that the number of students that you have and things along those lines. They give you a number of staff that they say is the minimum number. It's the EPS total. And so that's what you see in this column. And then over here is our actual. And so it gives you an idea of where we prioritize our, resources. And so to put that in, context, and this is, based on what we submitted to the state back in October. So this will be October, November. So this will be slightly different based on the budget that is in front of you. But we have fewer librarians than what the state says we need to have, but we have significantly more, for example, guidance, to the tune of almost twice as many guidance staff, twice as many ed techs as what the state formula assigns to us. So it gives you an idea of what some of the cost drivers are for this difference between what the state says we should have and what we actually have, what the state says we should spend and what we actually spend. And so that's all I had for today. I hope that answers the questions about some of the local comparisons and offers some helpful context to you. And, we'll just take any questions that you have. I'll stop sharing for that.
Questions? There are none. I'm trying to see if Councilor Rodriguez is present. Yes. Okay. No questions from anyone. Councilor Trevorrow, go ahead.
I don't have any questions. I just wanted to say thank you for taking the time to go into depth with all those answers. It's always really interesting to look at the data at that level. So thank you.
Thank you.
Did you call on me?
I did. Your hand is up.
Thanks. Thank you for the presentation again, Superintendent Botana. And the slide that looks like this, that your Director of Finance put together that talks about federal funding. I guess I'm following up on a question that I know Councilor Fournier asked at our last joint meeting with regard to the use of federal funds. And thank you for sharing this information. And I know that you have a plan for those unspent federal funds. I'm wondering the extent to which you think that there's the kind of feasibility or the possibility of using additional federal funds in this FY23 budget. Again, I know the question was asked and Councilor Fournier is traveling right now. So I just wanted to follow up on this, given that you provided the information and knowing that, for both budgets, as was earlier recognized, we're all operating in an environment of inflation and, cost pressures. And so just want to bring up that conversation and hear what you have to say about whether or not, you can weigh in on that idea, which of course we're thinking about on the city side as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why we started with a slide that shows what the implications are. Slide 6, which is the one that shows you how much money we have left over. This is a solid estimate at this point of what we think we would have available. So there is clearly money there that is available for use. And, some of it, as I mentioned, is, we have a plan for how to use that, that involves the board and the community. But if that were the decision that the board, was asked to make, that's what is available. And then I just want to stress what is in slide 1, because, my experience is that we have a very short memory for these types of things. And so I wanted it in the record that if we were to basically borrow from those federal funds so that we didn't have to raise taxes, we're going to be looking at very significant tax increases down the road, just based on our history of just the ability to continue to provide the services that we provide, will cost with escalations from year to year, that you're looking at, things that would range from a, 7% to a, 13.5% increase on the tax rate. And that is not going to be easy for any community to shoulder.
Right. Okay. Yes. Thank you for bringing that up. And that's this guy here that shows us what the impact would be. So thanks for bringing that information forward. It's really helpful to inform the discussion, both with regard to opportunity and cost. Thanks.
Councilor Chan.
Thank you, Chair. Superintendent Botana, the increases that the school is looking at this year, how many of those investments are mandated and how many of those investments are not mandated? Because a lot of the projections that you're talking about in the future are non-mandated investments. So I'm just wondering how many, if we were to look at the increases, how many of them were mandated and not mandated?
I would need your definition of what is mandate versus not mandate.
Mandated be basically what the state says is part of the EPS, investment. So things like parent specialists is not something that the state says that you need to fund. That's something that we would fund on our own side. Things like all those investments that you were talking about earlier, increases in pre-K from 9 faculty to 27 over 4 years. That's not mandated. That's something that we choose to do on the local side. I'm just wondering, of the increases this year, how many of those investments are mandated and not mandated? Thank you.
Well, I think it's important to remember that our increases this year are extremely modest. The bulk of those increases are the costs associated with running what we currently run. I don't remember off the top of my head, but it's in the neighborhood of $500,000, Kathy, in terms of new things that we're funding this year that weren't, and many of those with their own revenue streams. So I think that the total impact of the additional programming is somewhere in the neighborhood of $400,000. But, you know, like that doesn't account for all of the things that we do that are not required, but that are an important part of the quality of education that we provide as a community. And you gave the perfect example. You know, this district has had, you know, the roughly $1 million investment in, you know, our family and community supports for our multilingual families. That is not mandated other than to say that we need to be able to serve those families effectively. And, you know, so there is a cost associated with doing it at the level that we do it.
Chair Figdor.
Thank you so much, Chair Dion. Just wanted to also remind everyone that we cut 19.5 classroom positions this year, teacher positions. We did add 5 positions, including one that was, the superintendent can correct me, but one that was required as a result of a new special education requirement that we serve special ed kids later on until they're age 22.
So they're 22.
22. So Councillor Chong, maybe in response to you, one of those 5.3 new FTEs was mandated by the state. But just to remind you, the most of the increase in cost in our budget is the result of increased cost to do what we're already doing, right? I mean, we're dealing with the highest inflation in decades, and that has real implications.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Any other questions? Comments, opinions? My God, I'm offering the floor. What an unusual meeting. Councilor Trevorrow.
I'm just wondering, I think we're expected to vote on this tonight. So would it be appropriate to get a motion on the table?
If you want to propose a motion, I'd hear it.
I just thought that would be a transition for us to be able to kind of get into the, you know, debating the merits of the issue. So I guess I would offer a motion to, maybe I need a dollar amount, but to accept and refer the school board's budget to the full council.
Do you need the number?
Sure. So it would be in the amount of.
Kathy? It's
133 million. Yep. 70,967.
And I believe that Brendan and his team have the general counsel have the budget orders already drawn up.
So I would just offer that as a motion to get that on the table for discussion.
Well, the problem is right now, Councilor Trevorrow, that's why I was making an all hands call, is there's only 2 of us on the committee. I don't disagree with the motion. I guess just for general discussion, and I'm waiting for Councilor Fournier to join us, hopefully. I don't have any problem with the expenditure side of the school budget. As I said earlier, I'll defer to the expertise of the members of the board and the superintendent and his staff to develop a budget. What I am concerned with is the issue of revenue. And to be candid, and I've tried to be that, is I think the general public has an expectation that if there are federal funds available that can depress the levy, then they should be used. I appreciate the superintendent's overview this meeting about how those funds might be spent in the future, but we have an immediate problem in putting together a budget that will make sense given the current climate that our constituents are facing. So had we had a quorum, Councilor Chavarro, I would have joined you in recommending to the City Council that we approve the expenditures, but I would have attached a rider urging the chair of the school board, the mayor, the superintendent, and the city manager to come together as a working committee to take one final look at the revenue stream to make sure we're in clear consensus about what that means and whether or not there's any availability for movement on that question. I'm not going to pretend this evening that I know that there's a clear answer to that position, but I think it's in our best interest to really take a look at that in more detail to see if there is any flexibility, because we have a budget to put together that's immediate for our constituents. And talking about 3 or 4 years out, all those projections might be sound, is unfortunately to some of my constituents an irrelevant conversation right now because they're looking at the tax bill that's coming in. And I know my predecessor was skilled at getting the city down to a 0% tax increase, which gave some latitude to the school board. We may not have that this year. It's almost certain we won't. And it's also certain we're going to make some cuts that are not going to be happily received by others in the community. So we're in a similar situation. And I'm not foreclosing the idea that the superintendent's analysis of his projections for spending those federal monies is ill-placed. But I would be more comfortable, and I would hope that the council would be more comfortable with the possibility that some other consensus agreement could be arrived at on the revenue side of that budget. But as to your expenses and the decisions you've made from staff to programs for our children, those make sense. I have no dispute with any of that in the budget. I think they're sound. So that's what I was going to do, Councilor Chavarro, if we had a quorum to entertain a motion. But I would welcome anybody's comments on that. Mayor?
This is not, I'm not weighing in on your, the substance of your comments, Counselor, within the Finance Committee's deliberations, but what I'm asking for is just a brief review of where we are in terms of our timing with one another in budgets, just so that any attendees who are with us here tonight and for all of us as panelists too, that we can just, Brendan, I don't know if you're, I'm looking at the screen here, you or yeah, you would be the appropriate person. It just, if you wouldn't mind, just refresh us in terms of the time frame so that we're all managing to keep on track. Thanks.
Sure. So, you know, at tonight's meeting, the City Council needs to take action on the 2nd and the 16th on a number of orders, including a total amount to be collected from taxpayers for support of the schools. And so, and we do need to take action at tonight's meeting to make sure that that gets its first read and second read in time so that they can get the ballots out and ready for the election. I do have Kathy Jones joining us tonight for the city side of the discussions. If we have any specific questions about election timing, but I think that's generally the timeline you were referencing, making sure that it gets passed through the council in time for the school budget election. And there are some requirements related to the charter in terms of timing as well. I see Kathy hopping on. Thank you, Kathy.
Yep, that helps. Thank you.
Chair Figdor.
Thank you, Chair Diane. And I appreciate your comments regarding our expenditures. so I'm just going to get to the meat of it, and I hope that's all right. But I guess just from a planning perspective, even if we were to use federal COVID resources to reduce the tax impact this year, I just wonder how you make sense of where that leaves us for next year and in future years. It feels to me like we would be putting such a potential, we could have people in Portland face such a large tax increase as a result, given essentially the cliff that we'd be creating. So, this first slide that the superintendent showed tonight, a 5% escalation factor, which is well within what we could expect, given that inflation is now at 8%, and we're in the midst of negotiating all but one of our bargaining units right now when inflation is this high, among other factors. And this actually is a pretty rosy scenario because it assumes that state funding remains flat. And we saw a $2.6 million decrease in state funding this year. So that would leave us with a kind of rosy scenario leaves us with a 10% increase next year. And I'm wondering how, from my standpoint, that feels very unsustainable and not something that we could make happen. This is a very tight budget this year. So we need to continue to meet our students' needs. And I'm wondering how you think about how, if we were to use some federal COVID funding this year that is available, how you think that we would proceed in future years.
Those are good comments, Chair. And you and I have talked in the past when it came to debt reduction on the dangerousness of cliffs. I don't disagree with you. And I don't pretend to have any answer. Rosy pictures aren't in my vocabulary right now when it comes to anyone's budget. So we can dismiss that concept. What I was hoping for was an opportunity for the key players to sit down and take a look at that in detail to see if there was any latitude available. If they report back there's not. But I to the council, we've explored that possibility as a way to infiltrate additional revenue. The four of you may come back and say it can't be done. All right? And that's why if I were able to propose a motion tonight, it would be to approve your expenditures. They make good sense. From an education perspective, it's the right thing to do for our kids. On the finance side, I just want to make sure we squeeze the lemon as hard as possible before we add more taxes to our constituents, both of us. So I was going to ask the clerk whether or not I can take a vote when there's only two of us here present from the committee. Kathy?
So how many, are there 3 members on the committee? If there's 3 members on the committee and 2 of you here, that is a quorum. You're muted, Councillor Dion.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I had other comments, but I was saved by a muted mic. Councillor Chavarro.
Thank you, Chair Dion. I think we can technically vote, but I think from what Brendan just said, we need to vote on an amount by which to increase the taxes. And so if we're both in agreement on the expenditure side, but we're not in agreement on the revenue side, then that would put us at an impasse to be able to vote.
Well, I think we can vote for the expenditure. We can approve the budget. I just want a rider. I hate the word compel, but would strongly suggest, urge, whatever term we're comfortable with, that the key individuals I've identified would come together prior to the council meeting to see if there was any latitude there. City
Chair Diane, I just wanted to, just due to my prior experience with
we
budget
can't hear you.
orders. I'm sorry, due to my prior experience with budget orders, I think the concern is that the orders that go to the council this coming Monday need to be published, and they have to include numbers, and those numbers are the numbers we're talking about this evening. And so that's the issue, I think. And I think in the past we have forwarded along split decisions, so to speak, as just described by Councilor Trevorrow. But that will make it obviously very difficult for us drafting the orders that are going to be presented to the council on Monday for a first reading. So that's the issue that's here tonight, that we do need both the revenues and the expenditure side to be determined to be included in those orders, and then to go from there. As you know, I think under the charter, the council's authority here is to approve a gross amount for school purposes. That's included in the appropriation resolve, as well as all the various budget orders. That can be reduced by the council with a vote of 6 members. So if you were to decide for any reason that that was the proposal, or you needed to do that, that would have to have 6 votes before the council. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody was on the same page with what we need to do and why we need to do it in terms of timing. There's also some state law requirements with regard to when the vote has to occur a certain number of days prior to the referendum vote by the voters. So there's a bunch of deadlines we're working within, and that is just some of my concerns.
Thank you, City Manager. Councilor Trevorrow.
Here's another question, not to complicate things too much, but just, given where we are. In previous years, the school budget has been approved before the final budget of the legislature, and therefore additional funding has come in that was then used after the budget was passed to reduce the tax rate. I think it had to go through an additional vote or something like that. Would a similar process apply if we were to approve the budget as is, but directed staff to look at this issue and see if they could work something out later on?
Well, there is an order in the materials, as per my recollection, that's an order regarding additional state subsidy. That does require the school board to review and propose how that money would be spent, and then for the council to sign off on that. So that, I believe, is the vote you're speaking of. That has happened in the past and been an extra step in the process. You are correct. With regard to what is being discussed right now, I think that would be just a discussion that would occur, I guess, prior to the vote by the council on the 16th, is what I'm understanding from Chair Diane, if I understand him correctly, and would just require looking at other sources of revenue besides the ones maybe you just mentioned with regard to the state funding, to see if there were alternative ways to address the increase that's been proposed.
So a quick follow-on question to that. Thanks, Councilor Trevorrow, for bringing that up. When that happened in the past and there was additional state funding that was brought in, did that happen after the council's final vote or between the first and second read? And I don't expect you to remember necessarily, Danielle, off the top of your head, but I'm just wondering if there's, if in the past it came after a fully approved budget on the council side, or if it was between the first and second read.
I'm going to look at Superintendent Botana. My brain is a little
If I may.
Yeah,
sorry.
Kathy, I'm sorry.
Last year, that's okay. Last year, it was after the vote.
I thought so. That was my recollection as well, that it was after the vote. We had a separate vote on that. Kathy's shaking her head and saying no, Catherine Jones. But I think we did have a separate vote. But I'm not positive of the exact dates.
I believe in the I believe in the order, there was a provision that if there was extra funding, that it would go back before the city council.
Yes.
That approval. Yeah.
It did, and that's the extra vote we're talking about.
Yes, not the referendum vote. Yeah, no, yes,
And
one
what happened-
referendum vote.
That happened last year in late June and early July.
So I
And the
have a
reason-
question.
I would just tell you the reason why that was okay was it was happened all prior to commitment of taxes, and so we were able to manage that and get that and have it impact the tax rate prior to that commitment. Once commitment happens, that's sort of a drop dead date for the city, and that means those tax bills are already out the door, and we're unable to make those changes.
And last year, the tax commitment itself was delayed a little bit, I remember, related to the revaluation.
All right. I like it. Conversation, finally. Councilor Fortier, welcome aboard. Can you hear us?
I can. Thank you so much. Sorry for being late. Travel.
No, it's fine. To try to recap, the superintendent has made the Board of Education's presentation this evening. Our discussions have fallen down on the issue that I think there's concurrence between Councilor Chavarro and I that the expenditures make sense. Where there's a different opinion, at least a few minutes ago, between Councilor Chavarro and I, is she's prepared to vote as is presented by the Board of Education. I was trying to find some platform to secure engagement between the superintendent, the mayor, the chair of the Board of Education, and the manager to review the federal funding that currently exists within the school department's overall fiscal house, and whether or not there was any availability of those funds in order to depress the tax levy. The superintendent has made his case that those monies are appropriately sequestered for future expenditure. That's where we're at now. So if you have any commentary or...
Yeah, I would like to, I take issue with that. I do not have a position on that. I do not.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't have a position on it. I merely laid out for you how much money is available and what the implications would be of using that money. I don't believe that that's my decision at this point. I think that is the decision of the elected officials. So I don't want to be characterized as being opposed to that.
I don't think I was casting you in a bad light, Javier. I'm just saying you presented the material. But I'll stand corrected.
Yeah, I just tried to present, the factual information about it, and I did not lay out a case one way or the other.
I'll stand. Okay. With that said, Councilor Fournier, do you have any comment?
Thank you so much. And I don't know if it's just me or my internet connection because I'm in a hotel, so God knows how good that's going to be. But Councilor Diane, you keep skipping a little bit, so I'm not sure if it's just my connection or if it's yours.
I've been hearing it as well.
It could be both. It could be both of us, but you come in good, April.
Great, thank you. I was hoping to have remarks prepared, and I am not sure what happened to the document that I wrote up, so I apologize. I think where I stand with this, just as far as where we've come so far, and I apologize I wasn't able to see the superintendent's presentation this time, but I think of course, my biggest concern with all of this comes at, when we talk about city services, what are the things that we absolutely are required to provide? And then how do we use our budget to do that? And then I look at the school side, having the same mission, or what are the things that we are required to provide for students, and what do the funds look like to do that? And I think we, are in a really hard place where, yes, we do have these extra, buckets of money from ARPA that we're trying to use as responsibly as possible. But I know we've had concerns for a couple of years now about what happens when that money runs out. So if we are using it to fund positions, or we're using it to fund longer term programs or longer term investments, when that money's gone, how do we then beg, borrow, and steal to make up those shortfalls? So I'm hoping to listen a little bit more. I do definitely like the idea of if we don't really feel that this is ready to go to council, if we want to look at ARPA a little bit more, I would be supportive of some additional conversations, but I am happy to listen a little bit more. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Figdor.
Thank you, Chair. I'm wondering if it might make sense to walk back through that first slide with Councilor Fournier, since it's so critical to this conversation. Chair Dion, would you be up for that? It does.
Fine, please do.
Mr. Superintendent, would you be willing to walk through that first slide again? Councilor Fournier, this explains just of what you were talking about in terms of the fiscal cliff that we could that we would face if we were to use federal COVID funding to reduce the tax impact this year. Mr. Superintendent, will you walk through it a little bit?
It's this Zoom thing is so new. I just keep forgetting. So this here on this side of the slide shows you last year's budget, this year's budget, and the difference. And then what we tried to do over on this side was to show you what the impact would be next year, FY24. So this is not multiple year projections. This is a single year, FY24. If our costs went up by 7.5%, 5%, and 2.5%. So those are three. It's a range. It's not intended to be. It's going to go up by this much or that much. For reference, 5% this year is 5.1%. Last year was 5.5% in terms of increases. So this is, our, couple of past years' experience is more consistent with this than with either of the two options. But we wanted to show you the range of what could happen. And then this assumes that this year we use, we have a 0% increase for the school district because we use federal funds, reserves, whatever they may be. And so as a result of that, then you see what happens in FY24, so next year, if you have a 7.5% increase in costs, it is 13.4% on the tax rate. If you have a 5% increase, it's 10% on the tax rate. And if you have a 2.5% increase, it is 6.8% on the tax rate. So this is intended to highlight that, if it can be done, again, this is where, I take issue with, characterizing it as, I don't want to do it. There are other slides in the packet that show you the $12 million that we have, that we expect to have available that could be used towards this. And, but I want to make sure, because next year we're going to be in the same place and we're going to be talking about a 10% increase or a 7% increase, or God forbid, a 13.4% increase. And so I think it's important. And then I did say this earlier that, so I'll repeat it, that the implication here is that we are level revenue from the state, which is not something that we should take for granted. We've had a very supportive administration, and they've done a tremendous job of, keeping state funding flowing to all schools in the state, including us. But, that is not something that is ever guaranteed. But so I think, I hope that helps, Councilor Fournier.
Yes, thank you very much.
It does, April?
Yeah.
Okay. Listen, I want to say it again about the federal money. Javier, I'm not assigning that to you and your plan. Clearly, there's a strategy about how that money is going to be used. So if that needs to be in the record, I feel like I'm in a courtroom now. I'm going to rise and make sure it's in the record. So it is in the record, okay? If I misstated it, because in my simple mind, you are the school department, right? That's how much I attach to you when you speak. Of course, Chair Figdor is there as well. So I wasn't being precise. I will strive to be more focused in my commentary.
I'm sorry if I came off defensive. I definitely.
No, yeah. I mean, what I would say in normal times, let's relax. We're just trying to deal with a difficult problem. So let's be open with each other. Thank you, though, for your comment. Go ahead, Councilor Chon.
I think the mayor was before me, but I can go ahead. I just had a couple questions. I guess my first question is, Superintendent Batana, how many vacancies do you have on the school side? Because on the city side, we've got about 250 vacancies. I'm just wondering how many vacancies are there on the school side?
Kathy, do you have an answer to that?
I do, but not right off the top of my head. So we can provide that. I can continue to look.
20%? Is it in the
continue to
single
look
digits?
as we speak.
Right.
I don't have a percentage, and I can look at that while we continue to talk.
Okay. I guess my other question is, I just want the school committee to understand that we have 250 vacancies that affect not just our day-to-day operations in running the city, but it actually could potentially affect public safety. And so when we don't have enough people, in dispatch or fire and police or at Barron Center, it compromises the public safety of 85% of the population that aren't necessarily affected by the school's population. So 250 people is a lot. And I think city manager, what do we have? Is it 1,400 employees or 1,600 employees? So, I mean, that's a huge percentage, right? Even if let's say it's 1,500, that's almost like 18% of vacancies on the city side. That's ridiculously high. Imagine running any department with almost, 18% vacancies. Imagine running a public health. Imagine running shelters. We have 1,650 people on the shelter side. We have not increased staff at all. Just think about that. Imagine having 1,650 people in our shelter system. We have not increased staff. And since 2016, the city's tax levy has decreased from roughly 49% to 44%, whereas on the school side, it's exploded since 2016. And, our services have not changed. We've actually had to serve more people because our overall population increased, whereas since 2016, the overall school population decreased. And it actually kind of stabilized because you've increased the number of pre-K programs since then. But the overall, kindergarten to 12 has actually decreased, but it's actually a bigger percentage because we've made more investments. This is a real dire situation when you have almost 18% vacancies in departments that, directly impact, people's well-being. I mean, I can't think of more vulnerable populations than people at the shelter or Barron Center, public safety, like dispatch and fire and police. So this is why we're saying is as a city, we need to figure out how can we come together as a city to make sure that everyone is safe. And because on the city side, we're not making new investments. We're actually bare bones when you have a vacancy of 18% in a lot of departments. So just wanted to put that out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. You're muted, Mayor.
Got it. Thank you. I just want to start out by saying I really appreciate the chair's comments and the superintendent's comments and just the recognition that this is hard. Budgets are hard, and they're especially hard when there's inflation and people are feeling pressure. And I really do believe, and it has been my experience, that we can work really well together to manage through both of these budget processes. So I guess I just want to sort of orient myself within the context of both of those comments and say, it's tough, but if we do this together, it's good for the community. So, and I think strong schools are good for the community. So that's my orientation. And I, as always, appreciate the work that you all have done here. My specific questions, just because Superintendent Botana went back to that slide, was that of the 4.1 projected, or of the $4.1 million used to achieve a flat tax rate in FY23, does that come from the $12 million in unspent federal funding?
That would be one source. We could go and further dig into reserves. So it could be, that's, I think the way I described it, it could be from any of those fund sources that we've used, which we used our reserves, significantly already in this year's budget, or from those federal funds. So it could be a mix of funding.
Okay, thank you. So it could be that instead of achieving a flat tax rate in FY23, some portion of funding could be used to simply lower the impact on the taxes. So it doesn't have to go to a flat. It could go, I'm just saying this kind of for committee consideration and discussion sake, is we've contemplated the use of $4 million to get flat, but it could be partly used from unspent federal funding. So I wanted to just put that out there as a concept. And then the other question that I have, Superintendent, is whether or not use of the $12 million in unspent federal funds is contemplated in the FY24, potentially 25 budgets. I know there's a deadline on some of this funding. And so out of that $12 million pot, have you strategically decided we'll put X amount here and X amount there in the next couple of budget years? And you may have already covered this. I apologize if you have, but of that pot of unspent funding, do you have it off the top of your head in terms of what would be used in future fiscal years?
Just the $5 million, which is the $5 million for the summer schools for next year and for the following year. And then there are a handful of positions that we committed to as 2-year positions that are that will be in the budget. As I mentioned, in June, we are working through all of this with the board, and we do have, we're in the process of getting all of that documented exactly that way, as what are things that we have already committed to do that are sort of school reopening type of things, and then what are the things that were priorities that didn't get funded, and then what are other things that the community brings forward as potential investments of those resources.
Okay, so thank you for that. Here's my last question.
And then can I just real quick, we are actually prepared. Kathy has this slide as a spreadsheet. So if you wanted to ask if you spent X number, if you reduced it by X number, what would the impact be, and so on. So we're prepared to do that if that's something that would be helpful.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. So last question on this front, at least for me, is I think I just lost my train of thought. I remember. So you talked about community participatory budget process with regard to the 12 million remaining, but some portion of that won't be available because of the contemplated future use for things like summer school. So those are kind of tied up in the board's strategic planning. And then lastly on that, so he's nodding, yes, that's right. So then I guess the last thing here is, so just to clarify, so of the unspent federal funds right now, the funding is used strategically in future budgets, but not for tax reduction, not for, sort of that loss of funding piece, but more for strategic investments. Is that right?
That's the board's decision.
Got it. Okay. That's helpful. Thank you.
Councilor Chavarro.
Just to follow up on that, so, and maybe this is asking the same question in a different way, but so the goal for using those funds in the future, would you be recommending options for the use of those funds that were one-time expenditures?
Primarily, yes. Primarily, yes. For the same reasons that everybody on this Zoom knows that using these funds to pay for recurring costs is problematic because it creates a cliff. But there are specific positions that we've committed to paying for in a second year, but that we envision going away. And one that sort of jumps out at me is we have a half-time staff person who is being paid out of ESSERF to support the development of our new website that will be launched this in July. And so continuing to work through next year, that position is something that we intend to fund out of ESSERF for another year.
Okay. And that's just important because the intention, from what I'm gathering, is it's not going to necessarily go to reduce taxes in the future, but it's not going to increase taxes in the future either. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Are we ready for a motion of some type? California?
I'm nodding yes. I don't know that I have a specific motion, but I think my last thought here is really just when I think of ARPA funds, I think we had a lot of really wonderful and amazing ideas and things that we wanted to do with this money. And I think we've been very creative in how we've been able to implement and use it so far. I think we also didn't expect to be in this place with inflation, with the just incredible impacts we've had from the asylum seekers, and just really looking at a very, very steep uphill battle. And so I am one of the biggest champions for our schools, absolutely. But I think what I'm having a hard time with is coming away from this conversation with such a significant increase that goes back to our taxpayers. And I feel like we can have more conversations before we land on that. And I think that's just where I'm at right now. So I don't know that I have a specific motion, other than I feel like more conversation might be needed.
Thank you. Any comments from non-committee members, counselors? Councilor Rodriguez.
Thank you, Chair. I think that I share the concerns of the proverbial cliff, even if it's a small one. And I think given that there aren't very many other sources or many other options other than those funds, I I would hate for us to ask for a meeting or some sort of process that is not taking place during a public meeting, even if it is, to request that information be returned. So I think that the time to either make a decision or to make a motion with some action behind it, it is during this meeting. And as the budget gets to the full council, we would have the same opportunity procedurally. But I would I would caution us to allude to some sort of meeting that would take place outside of the view of the public, where such an important decision could potentially be made. So I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Councilor John.
I would echo Councilor Fournier. I think we need to look at all types of revenue to offset potential increases. I know the school is worried about a potential cliff next year, but we're on a cliff now as a city. We are free falling. And the amount of expenditure that we are facing is just unparalleled. To have as many people show up in the month of April as we did, people who were housed at the expo a couple years ago, is just astronomical. And we're not getting support from surrounding communities and the state like we hoped for. In 2 days, we're going to see, people being having to leave hotels in Orchard Beach. In another month, another 250 people from South Portland. And that's an expense, and that's something we have to take on as a city. And that's just the beginning. And, when you have 250 vacancies, we have to look at outsourcing, to private sector for basic needs and services for the city that cost everyone astronomical amounts of money. So I think that, we as a city, as a community, have to figure out how can we use the revenues we have now to survive this free fall that we're in. So thank you.
Any other comments? All right. Thank you, Councilor Rodriguez, for your observations, but you have an additional comment. Go ahead.
Just wondering if Kathy was able to find the positions from the school department that are open.
It looks like on the local side, there are 35 FTEs.
And the school committee, how many people are employed by the school? Is about roughly the same size of the city. It's about 1,400 employees.
Closer to 2,000 various.
So it's a larger percentage.
Employees, not FTEs, but yeah.
Yeah. So there are more people employed by the school side than on the city side, 35 versus 250. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. City Manager.
Diane, Kathy Jones, what is the time frame, the number of days that are required for the vote to occur prior to the referendum vote? Do you have that handy?
Sorry, I was trying to stop my video. I'm sorry, I didn't catch the first part of that.
What the state law that requires that the council vote occur within a certain number of days prior to the referendum vote? Do you know how many days that is?
It's 30 days. So May 16th would be the final day that we can vote on that because the election is the 14th.
Okay, I just wanted to confirm that. I was trying to think of if there was any sort of way to change the time frame.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
We didn't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just trying to figure out if there was a way to change the time frame, but I don't think that there is. I just wanted to confirm that. Thank you, Kathy.
And I should put my hand up.
Go ahead, Kathy.
May I just amend my answer? So we have roughly 2,000 employees, heads, but we have 1,239 FTEs on the school side.
About the same size as the city.
Yes.
Kathy, I have a question for you. I guess it's preview of a motion. If I move to return the budget to the school board to re-examine their revenue side, could that occur and still stay with the timeline we have to do in order? Because I took Councilor Rodriguez's observation to heart that, okay, fine, if we need process that's out in sunshine and avoid any claim that we're hiding the ball, can I send it back to the school board then?
I think you can, Counselor. I'm just trying, that was the schedule I was trying to figure out as well. I think that if it were to come before, we're still going to have to put it on for a first reading on Monday. And then we would have to send it back to the board to look at. And then that whatever we agreed to or the board agreed to, and then that would be included. We'd have to amend from the floor the orders on the 16th. And so I think it could happen within the time frame. It just would, there'd be a few extra steps.
Thank you. Councilor Chavarro.
Thank you, Chair. I'm, one of the quandaries with this is that we haven't really had the chance to fully digest the city side of the budget yet. And it's hard to look at this outside of that context. So to that end, I have a couple of questions about the city budget, which we may end up I may be jumping the gun here in the meeting, but if I could just ask, the city manager's recommended budget has an increase of 5.5% in the tax rate. Did that budget assume that we were going to get the 90% reimbursement?
Yes.
Okay. And so do we know exactly what the dollar figure is that we are going to get?
$7.4 million.
And what does that leave for a gap?
$2 million and change.
And what is that on the percentage tax rate?
Brendan for that number.
That pushes us from 5.5 million to 7.6%.
Okay.
Sorry, 5.5% to 7.6% increase.
Okay. That's a big gap.
And we did do one of the attachments to tonight's meeting is a budget frequently asked questions and answers. And so we knew this question would come up. Obviously, this was a late change based on the state legislature. So that's a Q&A right in there, and it breaks down the dollar amounts involved.
Okay.
And the potential options, which we were planning on going over later in tonight's meeting.
Okay. And maybe, Superintendent, maybe we should just take a look at that, that spreadsheet you said you had prepared about, what different levels of options for using ARPA funds would look like.
Kathy, you've got that, right?
I do. Let me call that up. So can you see? This is a spreadsheet that was presented. And then we can put a number in here to show what the impact would be on the tax rate. It's currently at 677. And if we use 2 million, the rate would go up to 692, which would be a 15-cent or 2.2% increase on the school side only.
Anna, did you have a question of the chart?
I guess I'm just kind of looking to see, if we were hypothetically trying to keep things at an overall impact of what they are currently, as proposed with a 4.8% tax increase. Yeah, combined between the two, 4.8%. Like what would it take to kind of get there? I mean, we already know that we need 2.2 million on the city side just to keep it at that. So, what would it look like on the school side to perhaps share some of that?
So when I'm talking about it's actually 2.02 million, not 2.2. And since we're talking about tax levy, it's the same dollar amount. So, if we wanted to keep it at 4.8%, it would be a $2.02 million reduction on the city side to keep it there.
Or what you're looking at on the slide that Kathy has, those $2 million in here. That would keep the overall tax rate at the same place that it would be now.
Okay. So, I mean, we do have to vote on this tonight. I think we've established that, correct?
That's correct.
I think that's correct. Yes.
So I'll just offer that, my thoughts on this when I realized that we were looking between the two at a 4.8% tax increase, I was not hugely surprised by that or frightened by it, given the context that we're in. We've gone 2 years now without any increase on overall. And we're facing some unprecedented challenges and pressures on both of our budgets. So I think that there is some expectation that we do need to have some kind of increase. I know we often talk about, tax increases being unsustainable for the taxpayers, but the other thing that's unsustainable are increases that don't keep up with the inflation of our own budgets for the city and schools overall. And so to me, weighing that context, I'm okay with a 4.8% overall tax increase. I would entertain that perhaps we kind of try to come to a figure tonight that shares the responsibility of that $2 million that we need to kind of make up in order to stay at that rate. That's my thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Figdor.
I'm going to lower my hand for now. Thank you.
Okay. Well, we should have a motion on the floor so we can get this going. Councilor Chavarro, we started long ago to try to do that.
So I guess I would put a motion on the floor to reduce the recommended school budget by $1 million and put that forward to the council. If I need specific language, perhaps somebody can help me out with that.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? Oh, wait a minute. I got to take public comment. What's the rule, Catherine? Mayor?
That's right. You need to take public comment tonight.
That's
3
correct.
minutes, generally 3 minutes. And then we just record the names.
All right. Let me go to the attendees.
Just a reminder, first and last name, address, or neighborhood, and Councilor Dion, usually the city clerk will keep the time for you.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate your intros. I don't have to memorize that. Okay, Jim Hall.
Hello, thanks, Jim Hall in District 1. You collectively have hit most of the points I wrote out wanting to discuss, so thank you. I did just want to take a step back from this year and point out the compound annual growth rate since 2016 that's published in the Blue Book. The inflation rate as a compound figure since then has been 3.06. And if you look at the school, it's been rising much faster, 3.63, while the city has been 2.03. So that's just some larger scale indication of tax responsibility. I'm hoping that this current motion that you're talking about to share that in the current crisis is helpful, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
John. Is there anyone? Please raise your hand. Seeing none, I'm going to close public. We have a motion on the floor. Discussion. Councilor Fournier.
You
Go
called
ahead.
before I even raised my hand.
I could feel it. Go ahead.
Have that ESPN. I love it. My only question is, Councilor Trevorrow offered the motion for the $1 million reduction. So that's not a 2% reduction, right? That's just $1 million. If you could just, Brendan, help me out with the math, please.
Sure. So I got multiple computers running. Let me see. So that takes the school side reduction to 20, or increase in property tax levy to 21 cents or 3.1%. And the new combined, without any change on the city side, would be 4.2% overall. So, but we know we have that $2.02 million issue on the city side. So assuming that did not, if that didn't get corrected, or if we did correct it, I guess I should say, if we added $2 million to the city side of the tax levy, the combined would be 5.3%.
Great. Thank you. That's helpful. No other comments. I appreciate the motion by Councilor Trevorrow. I think just as she outlined, it's so hard, but I think it's definitely, this is something that I'm hoping we can share the burden of trying to make this work. So I'm supportive of this.
Chair Figdor.
Yeah, I just want to, I appreciate Councilor Trevorrow for being solution-oriented, and certainly I want to be solution-oriented as well. But I do want to just point out how problematic it is that our budget cycles are not better aligned, as you as councilors haven't investigated this budget at all, your budget, I should say. And yet we've, spent weeks and weeks looking through our budget with a fine-tooth comb. And so I do want to, again, perhaps use this opportunity to point out how that makes this process, it makes it a less good process overall, because we just don't have the same level of examination and understanding and decision making when we're making now what would be a major decision for the school district.
Thank you, Chair. And for the record, was used earlier. For the record, I allowed you to comment on a motion. So, though I do appreciate your observations as far as the disconnect between the rhythm of a school budget and that of the municipality. Noted. We have a motion on the floor. I guess I'll call all those in favor of the motion. Councilor Trevorrow.
Yes.
Councilor Fournier.
Yes.
And I'll vote yes as well. Motion carries. All right, then. That concludes the school portion of this meeting. I want to thank everyone who chose to attend for doing so and the comments. And now we have to begin discussing municipal. I will take a 5-minute break. So we're going to just take a refresher and we'll start again at 6:40.
Thank you. Thank you again for having us, Chair Dion, and to the committee.
You're welcome, Adam.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, everybody.